This is how we're going to end our 2 quarters of the Resilient Design at Large. And I couldn't think of a better way to end this because at the end of the day, resilience is about people doing a better job in their own lives, being more successful, but we don't live alone, we work together. And I can just say it honestly, the person who's inspired me more than anybody else about the truth of genius and the truth of teams and the truth of maybe how the way the world works is right here. And so you can read her bio and her many successes and get excited for yourself. But I think the best thing to do is for me to turn it over. Really honored to have you here, Professor Hill. And she's going to talk for a while. And when she runs out of talking, we might have time to ask her questions if the tech holds up. But I'm going to give it over to you. And we're just so happy to have you here.
Well, it is such a privilege to be here. And I wish I could be with you there physically. And it's not just because you're in San Diego and I'm in Boston in March, but I have been an advisor to Cal IT2 and always learned so much when I come to the campus. So I do have some things to talk about, but I'm really happy to hear from you all along the way. So I don't care if we finish. I just as soon hear what you're thinking, because one of the things I've learned as a professor is I always learn more from the people in the room than I learn from myself, if you will. I'm just a part of the puzzle to help facilitate, hopefully, a conversation amongst us about how we can build organizations that are more resilient and be more resilient ourselves. So it's a privilege to be with you, and I am going to share some slides with you. And I'm going to go through them. I don't know if I'm going to say fairly quickly, but I think this one's already open the proper way. And can you see those? Okay. So what I'm going to do, and I really want someone there, since I can't really see you, for some reason when my slides are up, I can't see you. So somebody please just let me know if someone has a question or yell out or whatever, because I'm happy to have a conversation. So I'm a professor at Harvard Business School, as you heard, and I'm more of a generalist than a specialist. My work is on leadership, innovation, globalization, and digital transformation. So what I want to talk with you about is something that I'm actually a little uncomfortable talking about at the moment, because I'm finishing the manuscript about this issue of scaling genius, and I only have 2 more months to get it in. And when you're at this point in writing a book, you're pulling your hair out and saying, why am I doing this? Is the right thing? Do I have the model correctly? But what I want to do, because this is a session on resilience, is talk with you about a couple of the leaders that I have found to be some of the most resilient leaders I've ever met. And more importantly, they've built organizations that are highly resilient. So as I just want to tell you is that for 20 years, I've been studying what we refer to as exceptional leaders of innovation. That is, leaders who built organizations, teams, organizations, or ecosystems able to innovate time and again. And it's the time and again that is the really critical piece. So we began to do research on this question, looking at the connection between leadership and innovation, because in fact, there's very little research that looks at that connection. There's a lot of research on leadership and a lot of research on innovation, but not so much on the connection. And I'm an ethnographer, so I use the methods of anthropology to do my work. And so what I'm going to talk to you about, I really do believe to be the case, but we all know when you're an ethnographer, you can't prove causality. But I want to assure you that we usually spend at least 4 or 5 years with each of the leaders we study. And most of the work is on the ground with them and their colleagues as they're doing their work periodically over those 5 years. But thanks to COVID, I've also learned how to do ethnography, if you will, by Zoom. So that's been a special skill. And I want to talk with you about one leader in particular to start our conversation. So you all can see that too. Since I can't see you, I'm not sure what's happening here. So what I also wanted to say is, before I go on, all of this research is collaborative research. I always do my work with at least 2 individuals, one who is an executive who's out there doing whatever it is that I'm trying to study, and the other is a young person, and I'm going to say a young person because I'm feeling like an old person, a young person who, when they start with me, actually starts with me in their 20s. By the time we finish our book, sometimes they're a little later in their 20s, but I always want to write with someone who's actually, really younger, represents the future. And we 3, and we often add another executive or whomever else we might need, but we 3 do the research. So when I'm saying we, I really do mean we, not the royal we. But one of the individuals we were studying as a part of our research on scaling genius, and what we mean by that is, in fact, can you actually innovate at scale with speed? And how do you incorporate digital tools and data to help you do that? So one of the leaders we were studying was Dr. Rakesh Suri. In early 2020, I was supposed to meet with Dr. Suri face to face, but you know why I didn't. He was in Abu Dhabi, I was in the US, and we couldn't be together. So we first began to do our research. This is the first time I thought, how am I going to collect data by Zoom? So I was doing that and we were having a conversation. And the first thing he said to me, he said, I don't think you want to talk about digital transformation or how we're using digital tools, do you, Linda? I said, no, you want to talk about this disease, COVID. And I said, yeah, what is it? So he told me at that time, this is sort of February 2020, that this was going to be a marathon and there were going to be a number of sprints. Now, when he told me it was going to be a marathon, I thought he meant, I don't know, a number of months. But no, he meant a number of years. And I just didn't appreciate that. But what he said to me next was, Linda, I need to talk with you about the following. You know what does it mean to lead through a fog? What does it mean when you can't see, when you have no vision? Because so many people tie leadership to vision. And as he said, I can't see, it is foggy. Now, I would say that there's lots about the world now that leaders will tell us they feel like they're leading through a fog. And this is why resilience becomes a very important piece of the puzzle. Now, Dr. Suri, as you can see, is a surgeon. He is an unbelievable pioneering surgeon in robotics, so he's very innovative himself. But when he said to me, and he didn't feel good about it, I can't see, how do I lead? So then he told me that his first instinct was to try to take charge and steer the ship. But that's what he was supposed to do because he read that in, Crisis Management 101. But he soon began to realize that was exactly the wrong thing to do. Instead, he had to figure out, and I'm using his words, how to hyper-empower his people. I have to hyper-empower them, Linda. I have to convince them that there's nothing called business as usual. And instead, we all need to be agile. We all need to be innovative problem solvers. So he said, how do I get people to be able to do that? Now, in fact, he'd been working on getting people to do that and have that kind of mindset for a while, but he really needed to get it done if they were going to get through COVID. And I want to tell you that he thought he was late, but I'm here to report to you that they were actually testing for variants of COVID in early January. So he wasn't late. He was accused, in fact, of overreacting to what was happening. But he saw at first what he thought was a speck out in the distance, but he said, I soon began to believe that there was a freight train coming right at us. And so he had reconfigured the organization, make sure they're resilient, make sure people had what they need to take care of their families and themselves, as well as work in the organization. So that to me is about resilience. Now, Dr. Suri, when he realized he had to hyper empower his people, also told me, you know what, Linda, this is not necessarily natural for me. I'm a surgeon, so I have been trained that when I see blood, I'm supposed to stick my finger in there and stop the bleeding. So me sort of stepping back and figuring out that stepping back is actually something I want to come back to. You don't simply step back when you're trying to empower people. It's not something that is my natural instinct, as he talked about it. So we ended up speaking every day, and we made a video about his experience during COVID, and you can find it for free online. And I'll remember to make sure we get you the link. But he was like, I don't get this, but how am I going to help my people understand that everything we're doing is a working hypothesis? We just don't know for sure. We're going to have to use all the digital tools, data, and our judgment to figure this one out. So how do you build an organization where you've hyper-empowered your people, where they understand there's nothing called business as usual, and fundamentally everybody in the organization is an innovative problem solver? Well, that's what we had been studying for a number of years before. And the first company we studied back in 1999, actually, and we studied them for many years, was Pixar. And I'm sure you all are very familiar with Pixar. And interestingly enough, Ed Catmull, the founder of Pixar, and Dr. Suri spoke about things in rather similar ways. My colleagues a number of years ago in 2006, when Disney bought Pixar, my colleagues wrote a case about Pixar, and they said that Disney had overpaid for Pixar because what you see here and what you need to know, and this is Ed, is all of his children, if you will. These were the movies that were made in his time, or most of them, I think. But basically, they said that this is all lucky. This has nothing to do with luck. So Disney shouldn't pay that kind of money for luck. And I kept saying to them, no, I don't think it's about luck. I actually think it's about the leadership and how people work at Pixar. They told me no, we all dealt with that. And so they invited Ed to come to class. And Ed came to class, and I warned Ed that they're inviting you to class because they want to prove that you've just been lucky. So Ed said, really? I said, yeah, like the money you got from Disney, you didn't deserve. You're just lucky. And sure enough, the students began to speak to him about the fact that, you're lucky. And he was listening to this. And Ed sort of described the way they did their work. And one of the things he'd said is filmmaking is a team sport. We all know that it's a team sport. So you have to be able to collaborate. You have to be able to experiment and learn as quickly as you can, because the more you can iterate, the more you can perfect your movie. And then he kept talking about it. And finally, someone raised his hand and said, no, you know what? I don't think you're just lucky. I think you have more talent than most other most other studios. And Ed said, well, I'm not sure. We do have talented people. We have a lot of talented people, but I'm not sure that it's about the talent. I do think it's about this team sport that you sort of see here. And he began to talk a little bit more about how they do things. And at one point, someone raised his hand and said, you can't lead like that, because if you led like that, you would have too many cooks in the kitchen. And Ed turned and looked at me and said, what are you teaching people at Harvard Business School? How can you ever have too many cooks in the kitchen? I mean, do you know how much talent you need to really make a difference in this world? Which one of my Academy Award-winning directors or animators do you want me to fire so that I don't have too many cooks in the kitchen? What he said is, what you need to think about instead is, how do you get all of those top chefs to be willing to cook a delicious meal that someone wants to pay for? That's the issue, not getting rid of, if you will, some of your top chefs or too many cooks in the kitchen. And he engaged them in quite a conversation about things. And in fact, most people, it turns out, and most all around the world, have some saying like too many cooks in the kitchen. And that is not accidental. It kind of goes back to this notion that leadership is always about vision. Now, what I learned from Ed, and for sure, all the leaders I have studied have been visionaries. For sure, they've been visionaries. And one of their challenges is to make space for other people so that the vision is more shared. But fundamentally, they get that when you're trying to lead innovation, it is not about saying to people, I have a vision, follow me to the future. Instead, it's about creating an organizational context or an environment in which people are willing and able, if you will, to co-create that future. So co-creating the future is what we all need to learn how to do, and we need to know how to iterate on that if we're going to be resilient, because in fact, we don't know. We're all living in some ways through a fog. Now, when the fog clears and you actually have vision, then, people will follow you. But a lot of the time, frankly, these days, the fog isn't clearing so much. So that's what I want to talk with you about. So the first thing that you see in all of these organizations, and we've looked at leaders in, I think at this point, about 20 some industries, and also in government and all around the world in about 21 countries. And for sure, there are differences in how these leaders do things. And these differences reflect both national differences and, I think, individual leadership style. But fundamentally, there's some commonalities that I want to share with you. One is this mindset that, yeah, I'm a visionary, but that's not my job when it's about innovation. My job when it's about innovation is to make sure I create an environment in which people are willing and able to co-create together. So the first thing that they all say is, you know what? Innovation is anything that is new and useful. They have a very simple definition of innovation. An innovation can be a product, a service, a business model. It can be a way of organizing. It can be a way of cutting costs. We all can be innovative problem solvers because they want us all to know that we have a role to play. Innovation can be incremental and it can be breakthrough. Now, all of the leaders that we're studying in our books, both the first book, which was called Collective Genius, and this one, I don't think it'll really be called Scaling Genius, but that's the working title. All of the leaders we talked to said, of course, a lot of innovation is incremental, but all of the leaders we've been writing about also have done breakthrough innovation. I want to be clear about that, but you can't build an organization just to do breakthrough innovation. That's what they would say, because you know what? It took Pixar almost 20 years to create the first full-length computer-generated film. So you do want to design an organization that can innovate, but it's more this sort of mindset of building some muscles that I'm going to talk to you about. So what you see in these organizations is, first, is they want everybody to know you have a role to play in innovation. And they want you to understand that your job is to work on not only the shoulds, what should we be doing, but what could we be doing? What should we be doing? A lot of us are going to be doing that, and organizations often reward us for that. They don't necessarily, even though their rhetoric may be, they will reward us for what we could be doing, but not always. So what you see is these organizations, because they have more people who fall into box one, that is, they can be value creators and game changers, work on shoulds and coulds, they have a real competitive advantage for a whole range of reasons. And one of the things I just want to talk about right now is I think they're much more resilient, as I'm going to describe to you, because in fact, people know how to take care of the shoulds, But when the coulds come up, they're also paying attention to that. And because they're paying attention to the coulds, they're always scanning what's going on out there in the world, even if the world's foggy, to get some clarity to figure out what could we be doing, because if we're doing it, or at least we're aware of it, a competitor is not going to be able to come in and surprise us and disrupt us. The other reason why these organizations do have an advantage is because, in fact, people who are talented and passionate want to have an opportunity to work on coulds and not just shoulds, because they understand that if they don't get to work on coulds, they will frankly become obsolete themselves. They won't be able to keep up with the future. So these organizations, a lot of people who are both all throughout the organization who are both able to do game changing and value creation. Many, many organizations we go to tell us people come because they want to be game changers, but guess what? After a year or two, they understand that what they're really rewarded for is being a value creator. So we have a lot of people in four. Very important to have value creation, because you got to deliver the promise that you've made to your customers or your stakeholders, but we don't have enough people who also are comfortable doing the game changing. So for sure, in organizations, you often have an R&D group or something that's really focused on game changing, but these organizations instead say, no, we want everybody to think about what they should be doing, both in terms of shoulds and coulds. So one of the leaders that we studied, I will tell you, is a man who was working in an Indian outsourcing company. And by the time they finished doing some of what I'm going to talk to you about today, they literally had 25-year-olds who were coming up with $15 million ideas for customers. So what I'd like for you to think about as we're sitting here is I want you to think about how much of the work you do now, or how much of your time and attention is devoted to shoulds and how much is devoted to coulds. And if you're working on a team or something, how do you all think about that division, and do you have it right? Now, this slide, I'm not going to walk through everything about it. I just want to tell you what it's about, because it's the heart of how you as a leader need to lead if, in fact, you're going to build a more resilient, innovative organization. On the one side, you see the word unleash. And on the other side, you see the word harness. So what we see in these organizations is these leaders know how to use themselves as an instrument to do what the organization needs at a given moment in time as the organization is trying to do innovative problem solving. When you're on the unleashing side, you're getting the new. When you're on the harnessing side, you're getting the useful. And for those of you who read about psychological safety, if you look at the unleash side, a lot of the leadership behaviors you see there are about helping people feel psychologically safe so that they will share their talents and passions with the organization. So what they say at Pixar, which is why we called our first book Collective Genius, is that everybody has a slice of genius. Everybody has talents, everybody has passions. And shame on you, leader, if you don't amplify those talents, you don't amplify those passions, because those are the resources you need to actually get the useful, to solve the problems you want to solve for your customers and other stakeholders. So on the one hand, as a leader, you got to figure out, when do I unleash and how do I behave in ways that I'm unleashing? And how do I amplify the talents of genius in my organization? And when do I actually need to move to the harness or leveraging side? And for sure, if you have talented, passionate people, you've got to be able to move people from the unleash to, if you will, the harness. And so there will be conflict. And you as a leader have to be able to manage that conflict. Otherwise, you get chaos. What we see in too many organizations is that leaders sort of play on the harness side, so you never really even know what people's talents and passions are. Have no idea what they are really, because you're playing on the harness side before you've actually unleashed. Now, I know that's a little abstract, so let me just try to put a little bit, put more color on this. I'm going to be a little bit more abstract for a minute, but then I want to go to give you a specific example. So what you're doing when you're trying to build this organization that can be, where in fact people are willing and able to innovate or to co-create together, what you're doing is, again, using yourself and your own behavior in part to help create the kind of environment you need. So what willing is about is culture, and what capabilities is really about able. So I have to apologize to you. I'm a little bit tired tonight because I've already taught a few classes today, but I hope I'm being clear. So let me start with able, and then I want to show you a couple of examples of how this plays out in another organization with another leader who's very, very resilient and actually has built a very resilient organization. So the three capabilities you need to build in your organization so that you can collaborate, experiment, and learn are creative abrasion, creative agility, and creative resolution. I'm going to give you a quick definition of this, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like in an organization. So creative abrasion is about the fact that you as an organization or you as a team are able to generate a marketplace of ideas through debate and discourse, because you rarely get innovation without the collaboration of people with diverse expertise, experience, and sort of diversity of thought. When you have diversity of thoughts with talented, passionate people, you are going to get conflict. And for sure, we know that most innovation involves diversity of thought and conflicts. You've got to be able to manage it. And then this also needs to become an organizational capability. So what you see in these organizations is that people, yes, do actively listen and inquire, but they also advocate for their point of view. And one of the most important things you need to think about if you're leading a team and you want to get creative abrasion is something that I learned from my study. I got to spend some time with President Nelson Mandela, and he used to say that one of your most important roles as a leader is to make sure the minority voice is heard. And it's not that you're going to do what the minority voice thinks, but you need to know what that minority voice is, because often they're actually alerting you to a risk that you need to pay attention to, or a trade-off that you're making that you better pay attention to. Creative agility is the one that I'm sure most of you know a whole lot about given what you're studying, and that is this whole idea that you cannot plan your way to an innovation, you kind of have to act your way. So this is about being able to experiment and learn. So here, design thinking methodologies, agile methodologies, lean startup, that's all about how do we learn how to experiment and learn as in a rigorous and relevant way. And then the third one, creative resolution, is about how decisions are made. So what you need to be able to do is make choices as you're going through this process of innovation. And one of the things we know is decision-making is broken in many organizations because, frankly, decision-making rights are not clear. People don't always know who's going to make the decision. Well, that needs to be there. But before you make that decision, you want to have a more patient and inclusive way of hearing all the voices. So what they used to say also at Pixar, for instance, is that you don't want one group to dominate. You don't want the bosses to dominate, and you don't want the experts to dominate. The experts, in fact, that was a group that Steve Jobs really worried about, because the experts are very tied to the status quo. That's their area of expertise. So instead, you want to hear all the voices to include, if you will, the person who has the beginner's eye, who will ask the so-called stupid question and get to first assumptions. So you see these three muscles, you got to build them in the organization, and your own leadership style affects this, as I'll show you. And you got to build these muscles, and you also have to work to sustain them. You have to let people practice them. So this is Michael Koo, and this is, many of us owe, maybe I'm not exaggerating, the economics, a number of different publications have talked about how many lives were saved by the Pfizer vaccine. I wish I could see your hands, but I want you to raise your hands if you have the Pfizer vaccine somewhere in your system right now. So I don't know how many hands are up. Can someone tell me? 2/3. 2/3. Okay, this is the man responsible. So Michael Koo came into Pfizer in 2015, and he was brought in to do a digital transformation of their global clinical supply group. This is the group that ran the trials that made the impossible possible. They ran these trials in 266 days. Lucky for me, we started studying Michael's group in 2016. Of course, we had no idea COVID was going to happen. We're still studying them because we actually do continue to do our work in a longitudinal way. And so Michael came in, this is his picture. You all may not like it. You maybe could design it better. But when he came into Pfizer, he said, this is what I want to do. I want to create a patients first end-to-end digital and physical supply chain. And we're going to put all these various digital tools that you see here in place, and we're all going to use them. So Michael had this vision that this would take him about 3 years. Michael soon learned that digital transformation is more about the people than the technology. And lucky for us, it didn't take him he didn't get it done in 3 years, but he got it done before COVID, or a lot of it done, not all of it, because they're obviously still working very much on artificial intelligence and what's going on now with generative AI. But what I want to show you is that Michael had to figure out first, how does he convince people who work in global clinical supply that they're supposed to be innovators? Because at Pfizer, the innovators are the scientists, the technologist, not the person who's working on the packaging, to get things out or whatever, not clinical supply. But he told them, unless we're as agile as the scientists, and unless we're as innovative as the scientists, we're not going to be able to bring hope to patients. Because every day that we're not delivering a medicine to a patient is a day that they may lose their lives, or they won't have the lives they want to have. So we've got to do this we've got to scale what we're doing, and we have to scale in a way, and we have to do it with speed. So his worry was to convince them that they should be innovators and to also convince them that they should be willing to do this, because they were also, because it's a very regulated business, as you might imagine, fairly conservative and risk averse. Now, they need to be conservative because safety and quality matters, but you know what? You got to do that piece of it at the same time as you're being better at solving problems. So what he spent a lot of his time on, and what you see with all of these leaders, they spend a lot of time on the why. Why are we together? What is our work? What is our purpose? Who do we serve? Patients first. It took him 2 years, even though he's in a pharma company, to help people really understand what it meant to be patients first. Then there are also these values and these rules of engagement that you have to put in place that will help people be willing to collaborate, experiment, and learn. I'm not going to walk you all through these words because I want to show you some data. So one of the things Michael has let us do, we do have an instrument to assess culture and capabilities. So let me orient you really quickly to this. So the one side is his leadership team, and the other side is the whole organization. This is a global organization. And as you move away from the center, i.e. New York, you will see more red and yellow. And that's true in all the global organizations we've actually looked at, because it's easier to build culture and capabilities when people are in proximity to each other. So this is the data from 2017. And Michael's leadership team, I'm not going to go a whole lot into it right now, except to say that this team was fairly large. He kept the people he inherited when he came into the organization, but he added to it a skip level, one level down. He put some people in that rotated through. Plus, he went to all of his peers that he thought they were most interdependent with in Pfizer and said, would you let one of your high potentials sit on my leadership team? His leadership team wasn't happy about this. Why do we want these people to make, what is this about? Michael said, well, they need to know us and we need to know them. And sure enough, one of the reasons why they were able to run, if you will, the trial so quickly is that everybody knew. They said, we knew Michael knew us. So when he asked us for something or he needed something, we already understood that because there was a relationship, there was a social connection. So Michael's decision to simply have those high potentials be on the team made a huge difference in the agility and therefore, I think, the resiliency of everything they were doing. Because believe me, they were working like dogs. Now, if you look here, green is good, yellow is in between, red not so good. Michael's team, what you see with the data here, is about as good as it gets. If you look at the organization side, there are two things they're not so good at, and I'm going to dig into those. They're not good at that creative abrasion, diversity of thought and conflict, and they're not good at decision making. They're a little bit better at creative agility because they've actually been working on it for a year before the data you see here. Now, here is what I want to take you to think about, and I want you to think about a team you're on. And I'm not going to walk you through all the data, but I want you to look at creative abrasion because it's so fundamental to, if you can collaborate, then you should be able to deal with conflict. So what you see is they have some diversity of thought. It's yellow. It's more than it was the year before because they've been adding new people, both digital talent, people with digital talent, customer experience, and also just different geographies. Marketplace of ideas, they all now have places to meet. They either have cross-functional teams, they have cross-geographic teams, but they're really bad at conflict and debate. They're really bad at conflict and debate because, as they put it, they're very polite people. They're nice. So if we're talking about your project, even though we're a cross-functional team, I'm going to let you lead the discussion of that project because I don't want to kill Linda's project. She's been working on it for a long time. So instead, what they do is they escalate decisions because they know they're not talking about what they need to talk about. So they escalate them back up to senior management, even though senior management has empowered some team to sort of figure that problem out. So if you look at creative resolution, which is decision making, right locus means the right people aren't in the room anymore because it's now been escalated to the top management and they don't actually know the situation as well as the people who are on that multifunctional team. Also, the right pace, it's too slow because they're beginning to escalate and having to go back and ask. And integrated decision making, this is when you do both and, as Roger Martin talks about, as opposed to either or. That is, you try to combine ideas in ways that make sense because innovations are often about the combination of maybe two old ideas in a new circumstance. So they're not doing well at that. So what happened over time, and I just want to show you these data real quick, is that what happened over time is the middle managers got upset about this because they said, we have so many projects that are walking zombies. That was their term for a project that everybody knew. No one wanted to kill it, but we have so many of these and it's wasting our time, our attention, and our resources. So they went to senior management and said, we want to fix creative abrasion. And so what they did is they worked on these rules of engagement about how we're going to think together. These are the three rules, and we see these rules in companies. The first one is you have to tell people what your evidence is. So you can say, I believe X, and why do I believe it? Because my gut tells me it's the right way to go. And your gut might be very refined because gut is about experience. But then, even though you say that, they now have more data because they put these digital tools in, et cetera. But if you say that, I'm allowed to question you. Okay, that's your gut. Is your gut relevant to what we're doing right now? Can you just help me understand that? So you can ask a question. Anybody can ask a question. And then you can say, okay, I get it. But are we thinking holistically? Your team or your function may be able to pull that off, but not mine. So could we step back and ask, how can this work, this solution for all of us? So they began to work on this, and they took advantage of something called the Straight Talk coin that had been created by some other group at Pfizer. And Straight Talk coin was you put that coin down on the table in a conversation. You have them, everybody has one in their pocket. And if you think people aren't talking about what the patient needs for you to be able to talk about, then you put your coin down and you say the name of the kind of patient. So if the patient is a pediatric patient, maybe they have a name for it, there's Bob, an avatar. Are we talking about what Bob needs? And everybody then stops and says, uh-oh, are we really talking about what Bob needs? So they created all of these rituals to help them get better at creative abrasion. Now, as a consequence, I just want to show you, lucky for us, by 2020, you see how their culture and capabilities have changed. Now you see they've lost a little on purpose. I mean, that all great, and that's because they've gone global. And as I said, as you move away from the center, you lose a bit of that. And frankly, as COVID happened and they were onboarding new people, et cetera, virtually, they lost more ground, but they've now built it back up. So none of this is ever static. But they all would tell you, and when I talk to people at Pfizer, if we had not gotten better at creative abrasion, there is no way we could have run those trials. All of it in particular, but particularly creative abrasion. So it's interesting to see that this whole idea of collaboration that we all talk about all the time is supposed to be very easy is actually very hard, because the real test of whether you can collaborate is whether you can actually embrace diversity. Because what we know about diversity, when you increase the diversity on a team, no matter what dimension it might be, function, demography, whatever it might be, you either get one of two results. Either you embrace it and your problem solving becomes better, or frankly, you don't embrace it and your problem solving becomes worse. So for sure, learning how to do creative abrasion was really critical to them. So I want to just show you one other thing, and I'm going to do this quickly. And actually, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but this is an assessment of leadership style, Michael's leadership style, 360-degree feedback. What I want you to notice is I said there are these two ends, and you need to be versatile. Sometimes you need to be able to do one-on-one work. Sometimes you need to be able to do group work. Sometimes you focus on learning development, sometimes on performance. And go down through all of this. Michael, again, you can see how strong he has. A lot of green here. And the first line is, do you have the versatility? Do you know, can you do both ends? And the second line is, do you know when to use it, when to use individual, when to use collective, when to be patient, when to be urgent. So based on what his organization told him, Michael needs to get a little bit better at challenge and structure, right, in particular, and figure out how to use when he should be more patient. So one of the things that I would hope you all are doing, and why I'm giving you this example, is what you do as a leader really does matter, because those first two of your leadership style relates to whether your organization develops that capacity to do creative abrasion. The next two are about agility, and the last two are about problem solving. About decision making. And one of the things I just want you to note is that there are those moments when you need to be top down. So that leader who had these 25-year-olds coming up with $15 million ideas, sometimes he would say to the team, you know what, or the organization, I don't care what anyone thinks. I'm going to use brute force because we just need to make this decision now, because that is what we need to put in place if we're going to be resilient, if we're going to be agile. So it's not that innovation is about anything goes and everything goes in these cultures, not at all. They have very high standards, but the leader actually knows when, in fact, at Pixar, one of my favorite examples is when he said, Ed said, I had to tell them Sully looks good enough in Monsters, Inc. And I love Sully because Sully's hair is like my hair. So I think that's wonderful. Apparently, it was very difficult to do Sully's hair, but they wanted to perfect it. And he said, no, 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 the movie has to go on the screen by X day. So that's it. I'm stopping you because of their perfection. We've got to perform. We've got to get it done. This is urgent. So again, some of you may be real comfortable on the unleashing side, particularly when you're with peers, because this is a part of the challenge. It's not about formal authority. It's about exercising influence with people over whom you do not have formal authority. And formal authority does not work when it's about innovation, because you can only invite people to innovate. You cannot tell them to innovate. So I'd encourage all of you to think about, where do you like to play in terms of your leadership style, and how will that limit the teams you're on, because in fact, you're not so comfortable on the other side of this. And so both sides matter. The last thing I want to do, because I want to look at you, is there's a series of questions here. How much time do you spend on shoulds and coulds? Do you really encourage diversity of thought? How to get people to view reasonable missteps and intelligent failures as learning opportunities? Both Michael and Ed said they don't believe in fail fast. Of course you're going to fail. Of course you're going to have missteps. They believe in learning fast. How fast can we learn? The big problem is usually people people compromise too quickly. Not that you see too much conflict. And the other thing is, are you really developing and helping your peers and yourself become both value creators and game changers? And then the last piece is this collaborative ready, which is what our new book is about. But the only thing I want to say about that, because I want to stop and take questions, is that no matter what team you're on, you're responsible for. If you think about Michael, and if Michael's the white dot in the middle, then Michael's team, this global supply chain, they had to be able to work with a German biotech company who had the future. The drug was not inside Pfizer. So they were not only trying to work with each other, they had to be collaborative ready so that they could work with this German biotech company and be the integrator and get it back into the core business of Pfizer so that it could actually be scaled with the speed necessary to make sure that all 3/4 of you could have, if you will, that drug running through your body. So the last thing, I just want to grab this slide to end here so we can start talking. We also have been doing a series of surveys every 18 months of executives about what really matters in the digital world. And this is what they tell us are the 4 most important characteristics of effective leaders. You got to be adaptable, you got to be creative, you got to be curious, and you got to be comfortable with ambiguity. And I think the creativity in part is a reflection of the fact that they think they, as the leader, have to be creative, as opposed to understanding that creativity, it can be, is collective genius. It's not just about one person having an aha moment, as you all know. So let me stop there so that I can see you. There's more I could talk about, but I hope that gives you a feel for the work.
So much.
And any questions or comments were greatly appreciated.
So we'll see how we do this technologically, but I'd like to just do questions from the audience directed to Professor Hill, and we'll see how it works. I think that's what she wants to. So who has a question? And I'll walk the mic over, and we'll do it this way. I know you do. Okay, here we go.
Okay, or even a comment.
Comments allowed.
Hi, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. I have a question. When you're creating network organizations, which are networks of networks, and you're kind of trying to merge these different cultures, and some have sort of top-down organizations, and others have this sort of distributed, more matrix style organization. If you just happen to have any pearls of wisdom for dealing with those very different leadership styles that arise.
So let me. So you're making me talk a little bit. So both Michael and Rakesh, I know them both personally, so forgive me for calling them by their first names, are in our new book. And actually, the new book is about 3 different leadership roles you have to play. The first role is the architect role. You have to create this environment, the culture and capability, so people will innovate and be collaborative ready. The second role is being a bridger, which is, I think, what you're partly talking about. How do I bridge? Because we don't have all the talent and all of the tools we need inside, I'm looking mostly at digital, we're going to have to work with partners. Microsoft ChatGPT, like how do we work across so that we can co-create together? That is what the second role is. And the third role is what we're calling being a catalyst, when you basically have to create a movement across the whole ecosystem to get something done. So if you're trying to, if you think about electric cars, until that infrastructure gets in place, you're only going to sell so many electric cars. So I spent earlier in the week with utilities who were trying to think about how they're going to provide enough electricity and for all these data centers and all this other stuff we want to do. So what we've actually seen is if you're going to be a bridger and start to play out those and catalyze these movements, what we talk about is you have to be able to build the social fabric to support them. So often when we do partnerships, we make sure we get the contracts right about the IP and all this other stuff, but we don't spend enough time actually building relationships of mutual commitment and trust and influence with those people we're trying to partner. So what we partner with. So what we see is people who actually, of course, they're going to be different priorities, constraints, capabilities in the two different organizations. And so also, again, as you said, they might be structured differently. So what we've been looking at is what do you need to integrate? So the bridger role is partly a translation role. How do you translate so each side can really understand and talk with each other? You're doing the translation. The other role is what needs to be integrated. And only those pieces that need to be integrated are where you want to focus your time and attention, right? Other stuff doesn't need to be integrated. You just let it be because that's not important to your being able to co-create together. So I'm just trying to, the framing we're putting on it. And so what we see often goes wrong is you never take the time to build the trust. And it's going to be very hard to build trust with a partner if they don't think they can influence you. And one of the problems we often see is the more powerful partner uses that power, if you will, to get their way. And that does not lead for the less powerful partner to feel very welcome or wanting to participate. The most fascinating one we're looking at, and I would encourage you all to look it up, is a company called Avatar Inn. Avatar Inn, these are two, I always call them young men, which gets my 20-something. They're not that young, but they seem young to me, so I apologize. They're making me feel old today because of some conversation we had earlier. But what I would say is that these two went to the CEO of ANA, the Japanese airline, and said, we think we have an idea for the next new business for ANA. And that new business is teleportation. So ANA has allowed them to pursue teleportation. Now they've talked to the quantum physicists, and some of you may be in the room, and we're not going to be able to teleport the human body. So it's teleportation without the mass. So what they're doing is building a global infrastructure so that you and I can rent, like an Uber, a general purpose avatar robot to do whatever we need it to do. So they have some up on the space station. They have some working with elderly people who can't get out of the house because they're not very mobile to go shopping and do what they need to do. But this is all to say, this is a whole ecosystem. Just imagine all the technologies involved in creating this global infrastructure, and they are at it. They are making major progress at doing that. So there are lots of partners, both incumbents, regulators, government, other startups. And so this is what they're creating, that ecosystem. And again, it's about understanding how do you make it. The difference is, and I don't know that and I'm glad to get another question. This is something I'm very, very adamant about. They don't see themselves as being gatekeepers so that they can capture all the value because I'm the one who's going to introduce. Instead, they see themselves as facilitating, sort of putting fertilizer on this ecosystem so the whole ecosystem becomes more robust and we can all benefit from it. So it's a certain mindset they have about these ecosystems, not value capture from me, but how do we create a circumstance in which more of us can get done what we need to get done? So they use like the X Prize to have an X Prize on haptech hands. So they find out from the X Prize, these are the 3 companies around the world that are best at this. So let's introduce them to each other and facilitate their capacity to co-create because we need that for our business. That's the orientation. Does that give you some sense of how to think about these partnerships? And
we have a nod, and she's been taking notes. So
okay.
So we have a question. We have some questions online. I actually wanted to ask for a quick follow up. Something I've learned from you, and I think you've repeated over and over again. Can you hear?
Yes.
Okay. So innovation is we know it's important, but you've also taught us it's not easy. It takes a system. It really took an anthropologist and people to look at what really works because we have a lot of ideas about unicorns and white knights that aren't the things that do work. And so one of the things, I mean, I'll just make it personal, I've encountered is that I can learn from you and build a team, but it takes a while to build trust and to meet people where they are. And so can you give us advice on, doing innovative work when you know you need to meet people where they are and bring the trust together, and we don't have infinite time. Sometimes we don't get to meet.
Yeah. So I guess I would say the following about that. Going back to what we're really seeing is the social fabric really matters because innovation is hard. So one of the things is innovation is hard both emotionally and intellectually, particularly when you're trying to do something breakthrough. And you are going to have all those missteps. So I don't think there is much replacement for interacting and trying to work together on something. So what we do see, and it's not going to make you feel happy, is initially almost all of these leaders are pretty open to almost, quote, any conversation, to see what's out there and to just scan and understand what the coulds are and what the relationships are. And then over time, they begin to curate, and we talk about that, those relationships and how they're focusing their time and attention. But initially, they tend to be pretty open because everybody has a slice of genius, and you don't know. So they start with that, and then they, I guess that's the classic convergent divergence on your relationships, frankly. So as you know, and thank you for all your kind words, I think of leadership as involving three imperatives: managing yourself, managing your network, and managing your team. Managing your team is last, not because it's the least important, but unless you manage the network of relationships, your team will not be working on the right stuff. You won't know which coulds to go after or which shoulds, and your team won't have the resources necessary to get it done. So I would encourage you all to start a little open, and that group that you think may not know or whatever, and spend a little bit of time with them before you say, nope, they're not the ones. And I was just talking to a leader, I can't say who it is today because he hasn't released it. He talked about how he's trying to help everybody understand who are the hidden gems in the organization. So, if I go back to the Dr. Suri at Abu Dhabi, he found out about COVID because there was a cook in the kitchen. Imagine, if you know, hospitals are very hierarchical. There was a cook in the kitchen who was from Wuhan. And he said to his peers, I need to get to the CEO to tell him something is happening in my hometown that might impact us. So imagine, I am on the board of one of the Harvard hospitals here in Boston, that for the cook to feel comfortable, he can get to the CEO and say there's something happening in Wuhan is what you need to have happen. And you wouldn't know that whole thing got started because of a cook in the kitchen, right? Not because he's reading something or seeing the news or whatever. So I would just say, have your search be broad, be very open-minded. And then as you're learning along the way, then you can begin to make decisions. And so the other thing I've learned from these people, and then I'll finish with this, is that if you get resistance, so Avatar in, so they're working with construction companies, who's going to build the satellites for space. And when a company did not want to play by the principles they put in place, then they just sort of let that company fall to the side. They didn't work on that company. They're going to be too hard to bring over. We'll wait until, those first adopters get moving, and then that company's going to want to play, and then they'll either come back then. But they don't say no unless you violate the rules of engagement, which I did not go through all those rules with you. And then they sort of just part ways politely. Don't burn any bridges.
Thank you. So I do want to give the online person's question a minute. So I think I've got this right. In your longitudinal study, meeting these folks over long periods of time, the question seems to be, what really surprised you? Something you didn't know in the beginning, I think, that you learned over time.
Well, the first thing, and I think what really surprised me, is I had no idea that leading innovation was different from leading change. So I actually was shocked, because I'm a protege of two people who really helped us think about leadership as vision, a man named John Cotter and a man named Warren Bennis. I'm literally their I studied with them both. I worked with both of them. And in fact, I always learned that leadership was about vision. And I'm the head of the leadership initiative at Harvard Business School. And in our required MBA course, leadership is about having a vision, communicating and inspiring people to fulfill that vision. But when I first talked to Ed and some others, they sort of said to me, well, Linda, what if you have no vision? I mean, if it's breakthrough, you don't really have the answer to communicate to anybody, because vision is about where you're going. He said, I know why we're going. I know what the problem is we're trying to solve, but I don't have the answer. And about 3 or 4 other incredible leaders of innovation said to me, one of them said, I stopped reading leadership books because it says on page 3, I'm supposed to have a vision. Since I never have one, I guess I don't lead. And the man's an incredible leader of innovation. So that was a huge surprise. It actually was very unsettling for me, frankly. But leading change is about vision. So when the fog clears and you have a vision, then okay, share it with people. Don't need to hide it, right? But nowadays, there's a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty we have as we're trying to pursue and fulfill certain purposes or deal with very tough problems.
I think maybe this is a great question to maybe let you close with. The way it's written here is it really about finding the hidden gems or the hidden gems within each person? So making an infinite number of geniuses or finding the ones?
So I think it's both. So as I said, I love the idea of everybody has a slice of genius. I love that. And I think it's true. I think one of the reasons why some organizations aren't able to innovate is that we actually think some people are special and some people aren't, right? Now, we all don't have the same slice of genius. We all don't, we don't all have the same size slice of genius. I'm not trying to imply. I just want to tell you that the first project I did when I first became a professor at Harvard Business School, many, many decades ago, actually, at this point, the person I studied was the person who worked with Michael Jackson on the moonwalk, who spent her time trying to figure out how to help him use his talent, the best way he could use it. So she was known for being exceptionally good at creating the conditions for people who are truly geniuses to express that genius. So I've had this interest in genius for a long time. And, understanding that context for that individual. And then when I began, so it didn't surprise me that most innovation is actually more collective. But the importance of the environment in which the genius finds him or her or their selves is really something. I don't know that it surprises me, but I know because it is such hard work that does make a difference. So I became very intrigued by the conditions, not so much about Michael Jackson or also scientists who you can build whole companies around, but more about what's the context that has allowed them to express that talent. So that's the first piece. The other piece, though, is really how do you help other people collectively use the diversity of talent? How do you embrace it, bring it together so that it adds up to more than the sum of the parts? And really, there's a lot of research to say that often when we have diversity, it does not add up to more than the sum of the parts. It's dysfunctional.
So we're getting to the top of our hour, and I'm sure,
Okay.
I mean, I could keep you here forever, but it's 8:00 at night, I think, where you are. So if you want to leave us, the theme of this is resilience. We all have recognized the need for it between what we're facing as people and as communities. So do you want to leave us with a few words? You've already given plenty, but some thoughts for the people in this room that they can use, and we'll give you thanks after.
I'm working on. Well, I'd like I'm going to leave them with a question. I know this is about resilience, and I hope that what I've been talking with you about, you can see the connection to resilience, this curiosity, this open-mindedness, this agility, thinking that everything we do, every decision we make is really a working hypothesis. We collect as much information as possible, but we have to make a decision. And only when we see the impact of that decision will we really know whether that decision was right or wrong. And the question is, can we then pivot? So what I would say is it's not about perfection at all. It is about how fast you can learn. And I really want to emphasize that as the piece of the puzzle that's important. But what I would also like to ask, can I ask a favor of your class, even though it's the last class?
You can. Anything you want.
Okay, so I don't know how old you all are, and I'm being an agey. My team is trying to get me to do a TikTok, so we're having a battle about this, and they're sending me messages by ChatGPT and everything, and seeing if I can figure it out. So I hang out with these. But what we're writing an article on digital natives, which there's a whole literature about. We're not writing about the problems of digital natives and Gen Z digital natives in particular. We're writing about how, in fact, you build how executives and some executives are digital natives, but how do you build the kind of environment in which you actually take full advantage of what the digital natives in your organization bring to the organization, seeing them as assets? So the article is about we have some examples of leaders who figured out how to embrace, particularly their Gen Z digital natives, to actually help the rest of the organization adopt these tools and therefore be more agile, more resilient. So any thoughts you have about how you like to, and digital native, we're not saying it's your identity, or anything, but we really are using the sort of the science, what they say in the literature, people who were born with using digital tools and they're more natural for them. Any thoughts you have about ways in which you want to be worked with so that you can contribute to the organization and have impact? I'd love to get them from you. So I don't know if you all type in things or you chat them in or whatever, but if I'm really trying to, I want the narrative about digital natives to switch, to understand how working with digital natives will keep you apace of the future, will help future-proof you. So we're doing a project on that, and any thoughts you have about that would be greatly appreciated.
So as part of this, and actually listening to the way Professor Hill speaks, we want to close the series with some listening, which I think if you haven't heard that's what she's telling you to do is important because we can get feedback, but then we can put in her questions directly. And so maybe we can frame it a little bit. Not everybody here is a digital native. But do expect a form to come out. We'd like you to fill it out and you'll self-identify as a digital native or not. And Linda, we'll give you the information. We'll give you the data back.
Yeah, and will you save the chat for me?
We will save the chat, and this does get pieced together, and we put this online afterwards.
Perfect.
And you know where to find me, so
yes,
we will follow through on this. So
I hope I can come someday in person.
We will have you out in person with a respectful enough time to plan it right, and hopefully with no COVID weather to block us. So I just, on behalf of everybody here, I want to really thank you. And I hope to see you soon. And we'll follow up with questions through the chat and through other ways. All right.
Oh, very much appreciate it. Thank you. And you all, again, I apologize. I'm a little tired. I did teach earlier today and myself two 90-minute classes. So you're my last class. I think I'm going to take a little break now, but can't wait to see what you write in. I appreciate your time and attention. Bye-bye.
Thank you. That's the end of our Resilient Design at Large series, and it was a pleasure to be with you. Please do reach out if you have questions, reach out with feedback and complaints. I want to embody what Professor Hill just said. So thank you.